She was hired as the maid until she bathed the paralyzed billionaire. The washcloth slipped from Tanisha's trembling fingers as she stared at the man who'd just whispered 3 words that changed everything. Please don't leave. But what she discovered on his scarred back would either destroy them both or save his life forever. Because billionaire Nathaniel Blackstone wasn't just paralyzed, he was hiding a secret that could get him killed. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story. Because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The rejection letter crumpled in Tanisha Johnson's weathered hands like her hopes for the 3rd time this week. Standing outside the employment agency in downtown Chicago, she watched well-dressed professionals hurry past, their confident strides a stark contrast to her hesitant steps. The autumn wind whipped through her thin jacket, carrying the scent of expensive coffee from the cafe she could never afford. "I'm sorry, but your references aren't quite what we're looking for," the receptionist had said with that practiced smile that meant "Don't call us, we'll call you." The same smile she'd seen at the grocery store, the department store, even the fast food chains. At 28, Tanisha had scrubbed floors, cleaned offices, and done everything except give up. But give up was looking more tempting each day. Her phone buzzed. Another overdue notice. Rent was due in 5 days, and her savings account showed a balance that wouldn't cover a decent meal, let alone housing. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mother's medical bills, her little sister's school fees, and the crushing reality that sometimes hard work wasn't enough. "Excuse me, are you Tanisha Johnson?" She turned to find a woman in an expensive navy suit, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Everything about her screamed money and authority, from her pearl earrings to her Italian leather shoes. "Yes." Tanisha's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm Margaret Ashworth. I represent the Blackstone estate." The woman's eyes swept over Tanisha with the efficiency of someone accustomed to quick assessments. "I understand you're looking for domestic work?" Tanisha's heart skipped. She'd applied to hundreds of positions, but the Blackstone name was legendary in Chicago. Nathaniel Blackstone had built his fortune in tech and real estate, his family name synonymous with power and wealth. She'd never dreamed she'd be considered for work at his estate. "I am," she managed, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "The position requires discretion, reliability, and—" Margaret paused, her gaze measuring. "Compassion. The salary is substantial, but the work is unique." "I can handle unique," Tanisha said, though something in the woman's tone sent a chill down her spine. Margaret handed her a business card with an address embossed in gold. "Be at this address tomorrow at 8 a.m. Wear something professional. And Miss Johnson." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "This opportunity could change your life, if you're brave enough to take it." As the woman disappeared into the crowd, Tanisha stared at the card. The address was in Lake Forest, where mansions sat on sprawling estates like kingdoms. She'd cleaned houses there before, but never for anyone like the Blackstones. That night, in her tiny studio apartment, Tanisha pressed her one good dress and polished her worn shoes until they almost looked new. She researched the Blackstone family, finding photos of Nathaniel in his prime. A handsome man with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could charm investors and break hearts. Recent photos were scarce, but she found mention of a tragic accident 2 years ago that had changed everything. The next morning, Tanisha stood before iron gates that seemed to stretch toward the sky. The mansion beyond was like something from a fairy tale, all stone and glass, with gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. She pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger. "Miss Johnson." The voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes, ma'am." The gates swung open silently, and Tanisha walked up a driveway that seemed to go on forever. Her reflection in the mansion's windows showed a young woman trying to look confident, but her eyes betrayed her nerves. She'd cleaned plenty of rich people's homes, but this felt different. This felt like stepping into another world. Margaret met her at the front door, her expression unreadable. "Follow me." The interior was breathtaking, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than Tanisha would make in a lifetime. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. The house felt empty, despite its grandeur, like a beautiful shell with no soul. The master of the house is particular about his privacy, Margaret explained as they walked through hallways lined with family portraits. He's been through several staff members recently. They couldn't handle the demands of the position. They stopped before a set of double doors, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. Margaret's hand rested on the handle, but she didn't open it immediately. Miss Johnson, what I'm about to show you requires the utmost discretion. Mr. Blackstone is not the man he used to be. 2 years ago, he was involved in a car accident that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He's become reclusive, difficult. Some might say impossible. Tanisha's stomach tightened. What exactly would my duties be? Cleaning, yes. But also, personal care. He's refused most medical staff, fired 3 nurses, and driven away anyone who tries to help him. You'd be responsible for his daily needs, including... Margaret's voice dropped. Bathing, dressing, basic medical care. It's intimate work, Miss Johnson. Not everyone can handle it. The doors opened, and Tanisha's breath caught. The room was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a fireplace that could warm a small house, and furniture that belonged in a palace. But it was the man in the wheelchair who commanded her attention. Nathaniel Blackstone sat silhouetted against the window, his back to them. Even seated, she could see the broad shoulders that had once commanded boardrooms, the dark hair now streaked with premature grey. When he turned, her heart stopped. His eyes were the coldest blue she'd ever seen, like winter ice. His face, once probably handsome enough to grace magazine covers, was now etched with lines of pain and bitterness. He looked at her as if she were an inconvenience, another in a long line of people he'd have to tolerate. Another one? His voice was deep, cultured, but edged with exhaustion. How long do you think this one will last, Margaret? What do you think shapes a person's first impression of someone? Have you ever had to look beyond someone's outer shell to see their true heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Nathaniel Blackstone's question hung in the air like a challenge. Tanisha felt his gaze dissecting her, measuring her worth against some invisible standard that every other employee had apparently failed to meet. Mr. Blackstone. Margaret's voice carried a note of warning. Miss Johnson comes highly recommended. They all do. His wheelchair moved with silent precision as he rolled closer, and Tanisha caught the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something medicinal that spoke of pain and countless treatments. Tell me, Miss Johnson, what makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? Tanisha lifted her chin, meeting those ice-blue eyes despite every instinct telling her to look away. Because I need this job more than I fear you. The honesty seemed to surprise him. For a moment, the mask of cold indifference slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. But it was gone so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. Margaret, show her the rules. The usual contract. He turned back to the window, dismissing them both. I'll expect you to start tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Margaret led her from the room, but Tanisha couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just passed some kind of test. The contract was extensive, non-disclosure agreements, specific duties, and a salary that made her gasp. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of making. Are you certain about this? Margaret asked, watching Tanisha's face carefully. Mr. Blackstone can be challenging. I've handled challenging before. Tanisha signed her name with a steady hand, though her heart was racing. When do I start the personal care duties you mentioned? Tomorrow, most likely. He's been managing on his own recently, but it's becoming impossible. He won't admit it, but he needs help with basic tasks. Margaret's expression softened. He wasn't always like this, you know. Before the accident, he was different. Kinder. That night, Tanisha researched spinal cord injuries, reading everything she could about paralysis and care techniques. She watched videos, studied medical articles, and tried to prepare herself for what lay ahead. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of the next morning. She arrived at exactly 7 a.m., her hands steady despite her racing heart. Margaret met her at the door with a grim expression. "He's refused his morning routine for 3 days," she said without preamble. "He won't eat, won't take his medications, and he certainly won't allow anyone to help him wash. He's going to make himself seriously ill." Tanisha nodded, understanding the subtext. This was her first real test. She made her way to his suite, a tray of breakfast balanced in her hands. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the hallway, but when she knocked on his door, silence was her only answer. "Mr. Blackstone? It's Tanisha. I have your breakfast. I don't want it." His voice came through the door, muffled and tired. She tried the handle. Unlocked. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The sight that greeted her made her heart clench. Nathaniel sat slumped in his wheelchair beside the bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes. His hair was disheveled, his face drawn with exhaustion. The proud, intimidating man from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and lost. "I said I don't want it." He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. "When did you last eat?" she asked, setting the tray on a nearby table. "I don't see how that's your concern." Tanisha moved closer, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the pale cast to his skin. "It's my concern because you hired me to take care of you. And right now, you look like hell." That got his attention. His head snapped up, those blue eyes flashing with anger. "Excuse me? You heard me." She pulled a chair over and sat down, so they were at eye level. "You can fire me if you want, but first you're going to eat something and take your medication. Then we're going to talk about getting you cleaned up." "I don't need." "Yes, you do." Her voice was gentle but firm. "And there's no shame in it. But if you keep refusing help, you're going to end up in the hospital." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Tanisha could see the war playing out in his expression. Pride battling with need. Independence fighting against reality. Finally, he looked away. Fine. The breakfast. But nothing else. It was a small victory, but Tanisha would take it. She watched him eat, noting how his hands shook slightly as he lifted the coffee cup. When he'd finished half the meal, she spoke again. "The bathing situation. We need to address it." His jaw tightened. "I can manage." "Can you?" She kept her voice neutral, professional. "Because Margaret says you haven't properly washed in 3 days. Your skin could develop infections, pressure sores. Is that really preferable to accepting help?" The silence stretched between them, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Finally, Nathaniel set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "You have no idea what you're asking. Then tell me. You want to know?" His voice rose, anger and pain bleeding through. "You want to understand why I've driven away every nurse, every caregiver, every person who's tried to help me? Because this," he gestured at his motionless legs, "this is humiliating enough without having strangers see me at my most vulnerable." The raw honesty in his voice hit her like a physical blow. She could see it now, the proud man he'd been, reduced to needing help with the most basic human functions. The loss of dignity that came with depending on others for everything. "I understand." "No, you don't." His eyes blazed. "You can't understand what it's like to go from being able to do anything, control everything, to not even being able to wash yourself without help. To have people look at you with pity, or worse, like you're some kind of broken thing to be fixed." Tanisha was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You're right. I can't understand that specific pain. But I know what it's like to feel powerless. To have your dignity stripped away piece by piece until you wonder if there's anything left of who you used to be." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "My mother has Alzheimer's," she continued. "Early onset. She was only 50 when it started. Watching this brilliant, independent woman slowly lose herself. Having to help her with things she used to do without thinking. Yes, I know about dignity and what happens when it's threatened." The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. "She fought me every step of the way," Tanisha said. "Refused help until she couldn't refuse anymore. And you know what I learned? Sometimes accepting help isn't about admitting weakness. It's about trusting someone enough to be vulnerable with them. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the arm of his wheelchair. "The bathroom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's equipped for someone like me. But I haven't used the shower in weeks. I've been making do with washcloths, and it's not enough anymore." Tanisha nodded, her heart aching for him. "Would you like me to help you?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. She could see the war in his expression, need versus pride, desperation against dignity. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, and the vulnerability in those words made her chest tight. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," she said. "We can start small. Maybe just washing your hair, or helping you get into the shower chair. You maintain control." He closed his eyes, and she could see the exhaustion weighing on him like a physical burden. When he opened them again, there was something different there. Not surrender, exactly, but a tentative trust. "Okay," he whispered. "But if you can't handle it, if you run like the others, I need you to tell me now." Tanisha stood up, looking down at this powerful man who'd been reduced to asking for the most basic help. "I'm not going anywhere, Nathaniel." The use of his first name seemed to surprise him. He nodded slowly, then maneuvered his wheelchair toward the ensuite bathroom. The bathroom was larger than Tanisha's entire apartment, with marble surfaces and gold fixtures that screamed luxury. But it was also practical: grab bars, a roll-in shower, everything designed for accessibility. It was beautiful and functional, yet somehow sad. A reminder of how dramatically his life had changed. "There's a shower chair," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I can transfer myself, but getting undressed is harder." Tanisha nodded, moving to turn on the water and adjust the temperature. "We'll go at your pace." The sound of running water filled the silence between them. She could feel his tension, the way he gripped the arms of his wheelchair until his knuckles went white. "I used to swim competitively in college," he said suddenly. "Water used to be freedom. Now it's just another reminder of what I've lost." "Maybe we can change that," she said softly. She helped him out of his shirt first, her movements professional and gentle. His chest bore the evidence of his accident. Surgical scars crisscrossing his torso, the muscle tone changed from months of paralysis. But what struck her most was the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself, as if bracing for judgment. "You're doing fine," she murmured, meaning it. When it came time for him to transfer to the shower chair, she offered support without taking over, letting him maintain as much independence as possible. The warm water cascaded over his shoulders, and she saw some of the tension leave his body. "This is harder than I thought it would be," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the sound of water. "For both of us," she replied honestly. "But we're managing." She shampooed his hair with gentle strokes, her fingers working through the dark strands. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the lines of pain and bitterness seemed to ease from his face. He looked younger, more like the confident man from the photos she'd seen online. "You don't have to be gentle with me," he said. "I'm not made of glass." "I know." She continued her ministrations, working soap into a lather. "But there's nothing wrong with gentleness." When she began washing his back, her movements slowed. Her fingers traced along a particularly vicious scar that ran from his shoulder blade to his spine. "The accident?" she asked softly. "Surgery. Multiple surgeries." His voice was tight. "They had to rebuild half my spine." Her touch was featherlight as she cleansed around the scar tissue. She could feel him trembling slightly, though whether from cold or emotion, she couldn't tell. "You're very brave," she said. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Brave? I'm sitting here naked and helpless while my employee bathes me like a child. How is that brave?" Tanisha paused, her hands stilling on his shoulders. "Because you're still here. Because you're still fighting, even when everything inside you wants to give up. That's the bravest thing I know." Something broke in him then. She saw it in the way his shoulders shook, the way his head dropped forward. He didn't make a sound, but she could feel the emotion radiating from him like heat. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to be this person." "You don't have to figure it out all at once," she said, her voice gentle. Just focus on today. On this moment. She finished washing him in comfortable silence, her movements sure and caring. When she wrapped a heated towel around his shoulders, he looked up at her with eyes that were no longer cold. They were still guarded, still wounded, but there was something else there now. Gratitude, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "Thank you," he said, and she could hear the weight of everything unsaid in those two words. "You're welcome." As she helped him get dressed, neither of them spoke about what had just happened. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The wall he'd built around himself had developed its first crack, and Tanisha had seen glimpses of the man beneath the armor. Have you ever had to trust someone completely, even when everything in you wanted to build walls? What do you think it takes to let someone see your most vulnerable moments? Share your experiences below. Later that day, as Tanisha cleaned the rest of his suite, she caught him watching her work. Not with the cold assessment from yesterday, but with something warmer, more human. "Tanisha," he called as she prepared to leave for the day. "Yes. Tomorrow, the shower, we'll do it again." It was a question, not a command. A request for help rather than an expectation of service. "Of course," she said. "Same time." He nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel Blackstone smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. As Tanisha walked to her car that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. She'd come here expecting to clean house for a difficult rich man. Instead, she'd begun the delicate work of helping heal a broken soul. But what she didn't know was that tomorrow would bring a revelation that would change everything she thought she knew about Nathaniel Blackstone, and test whether the fragile trust they'd built could survive the truth. The routine became their lifeline over the next 2 weeks. Every morning at 7, Tanisha would arrive with breakfast and find Nathaniel waiting, not slumped in defeat like that first day, but sitting straighter, his hair combed, wearing clean clothes. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Their conversations during his morning care grew longer, more personal. She learned that he'd built his fortune from nothing, starting with a single app developed in his college dorm room. He discovered that she'd been studying business before her mother's diagnosis forced her to drop out and take whatever work she could find. "You could go back," he said one morning as she massaged shampoo into his scalp. "Finish your degree." "With what money?" She kept her tone light, but he caught the underlying frustration. "Between Mom's care and my sister's school, there's nothing left for dreams." "Dreams aren't luxuries, Tanisha. They're necessities." She paused in her movements, meeting his eyes in the bathroom mirror. "Easy to say when you have millions in the bank. I wasn't born with millions." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard in days. "Everything I have I earned." "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." But his tone wasn't angry, just resigned. "And you're right. Money makes everything easier. Even dreams." The conversation stayed with her long after she'd left that day. There was something in his expression, a calculating look she recognized from the business articles she'd read about him. Nathaniel Blackstone didn't just solve problems, he conquered them. It was Margaret who delivered the first crack in their carefully constructed routine. "Miss Johnson, might I have a word?" The older woman appeared in the hallway as Tanisha finished tidying Nathaniel's study. They walked in silence to Margaret's office, a pristine space that felt more like a boardroom than a home office. Margaret closed the door with deliberate care before turning to face her. "How would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Blackstone?" The question caught Tanisha off guard. "Professional. Respectful." "Why?" "Because he's been asking questions. About you, your background, your family situation." Margaret's expression was unreadable. In the 2 years since his accident, he's shown no interest in the personal lives of his staff. The fact that he's inquiring about yours is concerning. "Concerning how?" Margaret moved to the window, her gaze fixed on the gardens beyond. "Mr. Blackstone is a complicated man, Miss Johnson. Before his accident, he was known for his charm, his ability to make people feel special, chosen. But he was also known for his detachment. He didn't form lasting attachments." "People change," Tanisha said carefully. "Do they?" Margaret turned back to her. "Or do they simply find new ways to exercise old patterns? You're helping him in his most vulnerable moments. It would be natural for him to develop feelings of dependency, gratitude that might be mistaken for something deeper. The implication hung in the air like a challenge. Tanisha felt heat rise in her cheeks. You think I'm taking advantage of him? I think you're both human beings in a complicated situation, and I think boundaries exist for good reasons. That afternoon, Tanisha found herself more aware of every interaction, every glance, every moment of silence between them. Was Margaret right? Had she been reading more into their growing connection than actually existed? The doubt poisoned everything. When Nathaniel smiled at something she said, she wondered if it was genuine or just gratitude. When their hands brushed as she helped him with his medication, she pulled away more quickly than necessary. You're different today, he observed as she prepared to leave. Distant. I'm being professional. You've always been professional. This is something else. His eyes searched her face. What happened? She wanted to tell him about Margaret's warning, about the seeds of doubt now growing in her mind. Instead, she simply said, nothing. I'll see you tomorrow. But as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Tanisha, whatever someone said to you about us, I need you to know that what's happening here matters to me. You matter to me. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. She nodded without turning around, and left before she could say something she might regret. That night, she lay awake thinking about boundaries and gratitude, and the dangerous territory of caring too much for someone whose world was so different from hers. She'd been hired to clean and provide care. When had it become something more? The next morning brought answers she wasn't prepared for. She arrived to find Nathaniel's suite empty, voices echoing from the main sitting room downstairs. As she approached, she recognized Margaret's measured tones and another voice. Younger, male, sharp with authority. Absolutely unacceptable, Nathaniel. Mother and father would be horrified. Tanisha paused at the doorway, uncertain whether to enter or retreat. Since when do you care what our parents would think, James? Nathaniel's voice was cold, controlled. They've been dead for 3 years. Since you started embarrassing the family name by becoming emotionally attached to the help. The words hit Tanisha like a slap. She stepped back, but not before she caught sight of the scene inside. Nathaniel sat rigid in his wheelchair, facing a man who could only be his brother. Same dark hair, same aristocratic features, but harder somehow. Crueler. Her name is Tanisha, Nathaniel said quietly. And she's not the help. She's a maid with a sob story who's managed to manipulate you into thinking she's something special. James paced the room like a predator. Do you know what she's really after? I had her investigated. Tanisha's blood went cold. You did what? Single mother with massive debt, sick parent, dropped out of school, classic gold digger profile. She saw an opportunity with a vulnerable, isolated man, and she took it. That's enough. Nathaniel's voice was dangerously quiet. Is it? Because I also know about the inquiries you've been making. The college applications, the bank transfers. You're planning to pay for her education, aren't you? Maybe set up a trust fund for her family? How long before she's moved into the house permanently? How long before she convinces you to marry her? The silence that followed was deafening. Tanisha pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure they could hear it. Get out, Nathaniel said. Nathaniel, get out of my house. Now. Fine. But when this blows up in your face, when she takes everything she can get and disappears, don't come crying to me. Footsteps approached the doorway. Tanisha barely managed to duck into an alcove before James Blackstone stormed past, his face twisted with contempt. She waited until she heard the front door slam, before emerging from her hiding place. Through the sitting room doorway, she could see Nathaniel slumped in his wheelchair, his head in his hands. The smart thing would be to leave, to come back later when the storm had passed. Instead, she found herself walking into the room. How much did you hear? He asked without looking up. Enough. He finally raised his head, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. He's not wrong, you know. About the college applications. I've been looking into programs for you. And yes, I've considered setting up funds for your mother's care, your sister's education. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Why? Because you matter to me. He met her gaze steadily. Because in 2 weeks, you've given me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just existing. Nathaniel. But James is right about one thing. We come from different worlds. And maybe I have been confusing gratitude with something else. Maybe we both have. The words hung between them like a wall being rebuilt, brick by brick. Is that what you think? She asked quietly. That I'm here because of what you can give me. I don't know what to think anymore. His voice broke slightly. All I know is that I can't be the man who takes advantage of someone in a vulnerable position. And I can't be the fool who mistakes dependency for affection. Tanisha felt something crumble inside her chest. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe we need to step back. Maintain proper boundaries. You're here to provide care, and I'll pay you fairly for that service. Nothing more. The clinical tone of his voice was worse than his brother's cruelty. This was Nathaniel rebuilding his walls, locking her out, reducing what they'd shared to a simple business transaction. Fine, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Professional boundaries. I understand. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her one more time. Tanisha, I'm sorry. She didn't trust herself to respond. Instead, she walked away, leaving him alone in his beautiful, empty room. When someone you care about starts pulling away, do you fight for the connection or respect their wishes to create distance? Have you ever had to choose between following your heart and protecting yourself? Tell us what you would do in the comments. The rest of the day passed in a haze of mechanical routine. Tanisha cleaned with ruthless efficiency, avoiding the personal touches she'd unconsciously added over the past weeks. The way she'd straightened his books just so, the fresh flowers she'd brought for his nightstand, the extra care she'd taken with meals she knew he'd enjoy. Now she saw it all through James Blackstone's eyes. The behavior of a woman angling for more than she'd been hired for. The thought made her sick. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she found an envelope on the kitchen counter with her name written in Nathaniel's precise handwriting. Inside was her weekly pay, and a substantial bonus. The money felt like a slap, like payment for services rendered beyond the call of duty. She left the bonus on his desk. The next morning, she arrived to find Nathaniel waiting in his study, fully dressed, his expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Miss Johnson. The formal address hit her like ice water. Good morning, Mr. Blackstone. I trust you understand the new parameters of your employment? Perfectly. Good. I'll need assistance with my morning routine. Nothing more. The shower was a torment of professional distance. Tanisha kept her touch clinical, efficient, avoiding the gentle care that had become second nature. Nathaniel sat rigid under the spray, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed straight ahead. When she finished, he didn't thank her. She didn't expect him to. But as she gathered the towels, she caught sight of his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man she'd been slowly helping to heal was disappearing again, replaced by the cold, untouchable figure she'd first met. Whatever they'd built together was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. What she didn't know was that in his study that afternoon, Nathaniel would make a phone call that would change everything. And that by tomorrow, she'd discover a truth about his accident that would force them both to confront what they really meant to each other, and what they were willing to risk to keep it. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Tanisha's phone buzzed against her nightstand, pulling her from restless sleep. The caller ID showed the Blackstone estate number, and her heart immediately began racing. Hello, Miss Johnson. Margaret's voice was tight with controlled panic. You need to come immediately. It's Mr. Blackstone. There's been an incident. What kind of incident? Just come. Please. The line went dead. Tanisha was dressed and in her car within minutes, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. Had he fallen? Was he hurt? The formal distance they'd maintained for the past 3 days suddenly seemed petty and meaningless. She arrived to find the mansion ablaze with lights. Margaret met her at the door, her usually perfect composure cracked. He's in his study, Margaret said without preamble. He's been drinking. Heavily. And he's asking for you. What happened? James came back. This afternoon. There was a confrontation. Margaret's hands shook as she smoothed her hair. He brought documents. Legal papers. He's trying to have Nathaniel declared mentally incompetent, claiming his attachment to you proves he's not fit to manage his affairs. Tanisha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Can he do that? He can try. Nathaniel has been spiraling ever since. He won't eat, won't take his medication. He's been sitting in that study for hours, going through old files and... Margaret's voice broke. He's talking about the accident, Miss Johnson. About that night. Things he's never told anyone. The study door was slightly ajar when Tanisha approached. Through the gap, she could see Nathaniel silhouetted against the window, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk beside him. Papers were scattered everywhere. Legal documents, photographs, medical records. Nathaniel. She pushed the door open softly. He turned, and the sight of him made her heart clench. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled as if he'd been wearing it for days. But it was the look in his eyes that scared her, wild, desperate, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. You came, he said, his voice thick with alcohol and something else. Relief, maybe. Of course I came. Margaret said you were. She gestured helplessly at the chaos around him. Falling apart? He laughed bitterly. That's one way to put it. My brother thinks I'm mentally incompetent. Maybe he's right. You're not incompetent. You're hurt and angry and in love with my maid. The words hit the air like an explosion. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not competency. Not business. The fact that I've fallen in love with someone my family thinks is beneath me. Tanisha's breath caught. Nathaniel. Don't. He held up a hand. Don't tell me it's inappropriate, or that I'm confusing gratitude with something else. Don't give me the speech about boundaries and professional distance. I've been giving myself that speech for weeks. He maneuvered his wheelchair closer, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the desperation in his eyes. Do you want to know the truth about my accident? He asked. The real truth. You don't have to. I was running away. The words came out in a rush. From a wedding. My wedding. To a woman I didn't love, could barely stand to be around. But she was appropriate. Right family, right connections, right bloodline. Everything my parents wanted. Tanisha sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I stood at the altar in front of 300 people and couldn't do it. Couldn't say the words. So I ran. Got in my car and drove. Fast. Too fast. And when I saw the other car coming, he stopped, his hands gripping the wheelchair arms until his knuckles went white. What happened? I could have swerved. Could have avoided the collision entirely. But for just a moment, I thought, maybe this was better. Maybe this was easier than facing the consequences of what I'd done. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of his confession. So you see, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, my paralysis isn't just an accident. It's a choice. A moment of cowardice that changed everything. Nathaniel. She reached for him, but he pulled away. Don't you understand? I couldn't marry someone I didn't love then, and I can't put you through the nightmare of being with someone like me now. Someone who chose this. Someone who's broken in ways that can't be fixed. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Tanisha stood up, moving to kneel beside his wheelchair, so they were at eye level. You think you're the only one who's made choices they regret? She asked softly. You think you're the only one who's run from something that scared them? It's not the same, isn't it? She met his gaze steadily. I dropped out of college not just because of money, but because I was terrified of failing. I convinced myself it was about my mother's care, but the truth is, I was scared I wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough. I've been running from my own dreams for years. That's different. You were protecting your family. And you were protecting yourself from a life that would have made you miserable. The only difference is that your moment of running had more dramatic consequences. She reached out, covering his hands with hers. This time, he didn't pull away. You want to know what I see when I look at you, she continued. Not a broken man. Not a coward. I see someone who's been carrying guilt that isn't entirely his to carry. Someone who's been punishing himself for being human. The other driver was drunk, she said firmly. I read the police report, Nathaniel. It was in those files you were looking at. He was 3 times over the legal limit. Even if you had swerved, even if you had reacted differently, he might have hit someone else. A family. Children. The words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, his eyes wide. You saved people that night, she said. Maybe not intentionally, but you did. And then you survived, and you built a life, and you've been helping people ever since through your businesses, your foundations. I fired 3 nurses. Because you were in pain. Because you were scared. Because you're human. She squeezed his hands. And then you let me help you. You trusted me with your most vulnerable moments. That's not the action of a coward. Tears were streaming down his face now. Years of guilt and self-hatred finally breaking free. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. I don't know how to be someone worthy of love. You don't have to be worthy, she said, her own voice thick with emotion. You just have to be you. The real you. Not the perfect businessman, or the tragic accident victim, or the guilt-ridden man who thinks he deserves to be alone. Just Nathaniel. He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. I love you, he said finally. God help me, I love you. And I'm terrified that loving you will ruin your life the way I've ruined everything else. What if it doesn't? She asked. What if it saves us both? The question hung in the air between them, a bridge neither was sure they had the courage to cross. My brother will never accept you, he said. My social circle will whisper and judge. There will be people who think you're a gold digger, people who think I'm having a breakdown. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to trust me enough to face it together? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. There's something else, he said finally. Those college applications, the trust funds James mentioned. I didn't set them up because I pitied you or because I wanted to buy your affection. I set them up because I believe in you. Because I see the woman you could become if you had the resources to chase your dreams. Nathaniel, let me finish. His voice was stronger now, more certain. I want to offer you those things not as payment or charity, but as an investment. In you. In us. In the future we could build together. Tanisha felt tears prick her eyes. I don't need your money to love you. I know. That's why I want to give it to you. When someone offers to change your entire life, how do you know if it's coming from love or guilt? Have you ever had to choose between security and authenticity? Share your thoughts on making life-changing decisions below. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. James Blackstone appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with disgust. How touching, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The invalid and his nursemaid playing house. Get out, Nathaniel said, his voice deadly quiet. I don't think so. James stepped into the room, pulling legal documents from his jacket. I've just come from my lawyer. This little scene only proves what I've been saying about your mental state. James, don't do this, Nathaniel warned. Do what? Protect our family legacy from a fortune hunter? Prevent you from embarrassing us further. James's gaze fixed on Tanisha with cold hatred. Did you really think no one would notice? The way you've manipulated him, isolated him, made him dependent on you. That's not what happened, Tanisha said, standing up to face him. Isn't it? You've been planning this from the beginning. Find a wealthy, vulnerable man, make yourself indispensable, and then cash in. It's the oldest con in the book. You're wrong. Am I? Then prove it. James's smile was cruel. Walk away. Right now. Take nothing and disappear. If you really love him, you'll save him from this humiliation. The words hit their mark. Tanisha felt the familiar doubt creeping in. The voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, didn't belong in this world. She's not going anywhere, Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through the silence. And neither are you. This is my house, my decision, my life. You have no power here. I have a court order that says otherwise. James dropped the papers on the desk. Mental incompetency hearing. 3 days from now. And after this little display, I don't think it will be hard to convince a judge that you're not fit to manage your own affairs. Nathaniel's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. You'll lose. Will I? A paralyzed man who's become emotionally dependent on his caregiver? Who's ready to throw away millions on a woman he's known for less than a month, who drinks himself into oblivion and makes dramatic confessions about his accident. James's smile widened. I think my case is pretty strong. You bastard, Nathaniel snarled, starting to roll his wheelchair forward. Stop. Tanisha stepped between them, her heart breaking as she saw the trap James had laid. He's right. Tanisha, no. He's right, she repeated, turning to face Nathaniel. This is exactly what they'll say in court. That you're not thinking clearly, that I've manipulated you. And maybe I have. You know that's not true. Do I? She looked at him with tears in her eyes. You just told me you fell in love with me while I was bathing you, caring for you at your most vulnerable. How is that not manipulation? How is that not me taking advantage? Because I fell in love with your strength, not your service, he said desperately. Because you saw me as a man, not a victim. Because you challenged me and fought with me and made me want to be better. And what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize that outside of this house, I'm just a high school dropout with a sick mother and a mountain of debt. Then we'll figure it out together. James laughed coldly. How romantic. But romance doesn't last, Nathaniel. And when it ends, she'll take half of everything you own. Get out, Nathaniel said again, but his voice lacked conviction. The seeds of doubt had been planted. I'm going, but I'll be back in 3 days with a court order. And when I am, I'll make sure she never gets near you again. James turned to Tanisha. Last chance. Walk away now, or I'll destroy you both. He left, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence he'd created. Tanisha and Nathaniel stared at each other across the wreckage of their confession, both understanding the impossible position they'd been put in. We can fight this, Nathaniel said finally. We can. No. Tanisha's voice was barely a whisper. We can't. Because he's not entirely wrong. About the timing, about how this looks, about the power dynamic between us. You're giving up? I'm being realistic. She moved to the desk, gathering the scattered papers with trembling hands. I should go. Tanisha, please. I need time to think. We both do. She headed for the door, but stopped when she reached it, turning back one more time. For what it's worth, she said. I love you too. Not your money, not your charity, not what you could give me. Just you. The man who makes terrible jokes when he's nervous, who pretends to hate romantic movies, but knows all the dialogue, who's been carrying guilt that isn't his to carry. Then stay. Please. I can't. Not like this. Not when my being here might destroy everything you've built. I don't care about what I've built. I care about you. I know. And that's exactly why I have to go. She left him there, surrounded by the debris of his confession and the uncertainty of their future. As she drove away from the mansion, she wondered if she'd just saved them both, or lost the only chance at happiness either of them might ever have. What she didn't know was that in 72 hours, she'd discover just how far Nathaniel was willing to go to prove their love was real. And that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from facing our fears, but from choosing to trust someone else with our most vulnerable truth. The competency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Tanisha knew because Margaret had called her the night before, her voice tight with worry. He's not eating again, Margaret had said. He's not taking his medication. He's just shutting down. What do you want me to do? Tanisha had asked, though her heart was already breaking. I don't know, but he's going to lose everything if he doesn't pull himself together. And James. James has been calling reporters. He's going to make this a public spectacle. Tanisha had hung up the phone and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her tiny apartment. For 3 days, she'd been trying to convince herself that walking away was the right thing to do. That she was protecting them both from the messy complications of their different worlds. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She was scared. Scared of the scrutiny, scared of the judgment, scared of loving someone so completely that losing them might destroy her. She'd been running from her dreams for years. Now she was running from her heart. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was doing exactly what Nathaniel had done 2 years ago, choosing fear over love, safety over authenticity. By 6 a.m. Thursday morning, she was dressed and driving toward the courthouse in downtown Chicago. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she could possibly do to help. She just knew she couldn't let him face this alone. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters when she arrived. Headlines flashed on her phone. Tech billionaire's mental competency questioned. Paralyzed mogul's bizarre romance. Blackstone empire in turmoil. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the cameras and shouted questions, and made her way inside. The hearing was in courtroom 3B, and she could see the Blackstone legal team, assembled like an army in expensive suits. At the plaintiff's table sat James Blackstone, looking confident and self-righteous. At the defendant's table, Nathaniel was alone. He sat in his wheelchair, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his spine straight and his expression composed. But Tanisha could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests. He looked like a man preparing for execution. She slipped into the gallery, choosing a seat in the back where she could see him but remain unnoticed. The hearing began with James's lawyer presenting their case. Financial irregularities, erratic behavior, emotional instability evidenced by his inappropriate attachment to a domestic employee. They had witnesses. Former business associates who testified about missed meetings. A psychiatrist who'd never met Nathaniel, but was willing to speculate about his mental state. Even some of the previous nurses and staff members who painted a picture of a man who was difficult, demanding, and increasingly isolated. Through it all, Nathaniel sat silent, his lawyer occasionally objecting, but mostly looking like a man fighting a losing battle. Then James took the stand. "My brother has not been the same since his accident," he said, his voice heavy with false concern. "The trauma has affected his judgment, his decision-making abilities. He's become paranoid, reclusive. He fires competent medical staff and becomes obsessed with inappropriate relationships." "Can you elaborate on these inappropriate relationships?" the judge asked. "He's developed an unhealthy dependency on a domestic worker, a maid. He's convinced himself that he's in love with her, and he's prepared to risk everything, his fortune, his reputation, his legacy, for this delusion." The words hit Tanisha like slaps. She watched Nathaniel's face, saw the way his jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "He's talked about changing his will," James continued. "Setting up trust funds for her family, paying for her education. He's even mentioned marriage. This is not the behavior of a competent man making rational decisions. And you believe this relationship is the result of mental incapacity? I believe it's the result of a man who's lost his way, who's confusing gratitude and dependency with love, who's being taken advantage of by someone who recognized his vulnerability." Finally, it was Nathaniel's turn. His lawyer helped him to the witness stand, and for a moment, Tanisha saw the man she'd first met, cold, controlled, untouchable. But then he began to speak, and she heard something different in his voice. "Your Honor, my brother believes that love is a weakness, that needing someone makes you vulnerable. He's built his entire life around avoiding both. Mr. Blackstone, can you tell the court about your recent decisions regarding your finances?" "I can. I've been setting up educational trusts and medical funds. Not as gifts, but as investments. In people I believe in futures I want to help create." "Including for Miss Johnson?" "Yes, including for Tanisha Johnson." The use of her full name made her heart clench. "And you believe this is a sound financial decision?" "I believe it's the best decision I've ever made." Nathaniel's voice grew stronger. "Your Honor, 2 years ago, I was a man who had everything and felt nothing. I was successful, wealthy, respected. I was also completely alone. Because of your accident, because of my choices. I chose success over relationships, control over vulnerability, safety over love. And it nearly killed me." The courtroom was completely silent now. "My accident didn't just paralyze my legs," Nathaniel continued. "It paralyzed my heart. I convinced myself that I was protecting people from my brokenness, but I was really protecting myself from the possibility of being rejected. And Miss Johnson changed this? Miss Johnson saved my life. Not because she bathed me or helped me dress or took care of my physical needs. She saved my life because she saw me as a whole person, not a broken one. Because she challenged me to be better than my limitations." James's lawyer stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This is exactly the kind of romantic delusion we're talking about. Overruled. The judge's voice was sharp. Continue, Mr. Blackstone. I'm not mentally incompetent because I've fallen in love, Nathaniel said, his eyes finding Tanisha in the gallery. I'm mentally healthy for the first time in my life because I've learned what love actually means. It's not about control or possession or getting something from someone. It's about wanting to give them the world because they've given you back yourself. Tanisha felt tears streaming down her face. The money I want to spend on Tanisha's education isn't charity, Nathaniel continued. It's an investment in the brilliant woman I see her becoming. The trust funds for her family aren't bribes. They're a way of saying that the people she loves matter to me because she matters to me. And if she rejects these offers, then I'll respect her decision. But I'll keep loving her. The hearing continued for another hour, but Tanisha barely heard it. She was too busy watching Nathaniel's face, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with fighting for both their futures. When the judge called for a recess to consider his decision, Tanisha found herself moving toward the front of the courtroom. She needed to see him, to tell him how proud she was, how sorry she was for running. But James intercepted her. Come to gloat? He asked, his voice cold. I came to support him. Support him? You're the reason he's here. You're the reason he's humiliating himself in front of half of Chicago. No, Tanisha said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I'm the reason he's fighting. For the first time in his life, he's fighting for something that matters to him. Money matters to him. Status matters to him. I'm just a woman who sees past his wheelchair to the man underneath, who challenges him and supports him and loves him exactly as he is. She stepped closer to James. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? Because you've never had that. You've never been brave enough to let someone see you that completely. James's face flushed red. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have every idea. You're so busy protecting your family's reputation that you've forgotten what family actually means. It's not about money or status or public image. It's about showing up for the people you love, even when it's inconvenient. Like you showed up by running away? The words hit their mark. Tanisha flinched, but she didn't back down. You're right. I did run. Because I was scared and overwhelmed, and I thought I was protecting him. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. She pushed past him and walked to where Nathaniel sat with his lawyer. When he saw her, his face went through a dozen emotions: surprise, hope, fear, love. Tanisha, I'm sorry, she said, kneeling beside his wheelchair. I'm so sorry I ran. I was scared, and I convinced myself I was protecting you. But I was really protecting myself. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do. Because you were right. We're stronger together than apart. And I want to fight for us. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, not caring about the cameras or the whispers or the judgment. I love you, he said simply. I love you too. The judge returned 20 minutes later. The courtroom fell silent as he prepared to deliver his verdict. I've considered all the evidence presented today, he began. The testimony, the expert opinions, the financial records. And I've come to the conclusion that Mr. Nathaniel Blackstone is not only mentally competent, but that he's demonstrated remarkable clarity of thought and purpose. James's face went white. Love, Your Honor, is not a symptom of mental illness. It's a symptom of mental health. The ability to form deep, meaningful relationships, to care for others, to make sacrifices for their well-being. These are signs of emotional maturity, not incompetence. Tanisha squeezed Nathaniel's hand, feeling his whole body relax. Furthermore, the judge continued, I find Mr. James Blackstone's attempts to control his brother's personal life both inappropriate and concerning. This court will not be used as a tool for family vendettas or financial manipulation. The gavel came down with finality. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouting questions, lawyers gathering papers, James storming out in fury. But Tanisha only had eyes for Nathaniel, who was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever made. So, he said as the crowd began to disperse, what happens now? Now we go home, she said. Together. Are you sure? Because this is going to be messy. The media, the gossip, the judgment. Let them talk, she said firmly. I'm done running from my life. And I'm done letting other people decide what I deserve. He smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. In that case, I have something to ask you. What? Would you like to go back to school? I know a guy who might be able to help with tuition. She laughed, the sound bright and clear in the chaotic courtroom. I think I'd like that very much. 6 months later, Tanisha stood in the garden of the Blackstone estate, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. The guest list was small: Margaret, a few close friends, and surprisingly James, who'd eventually come around after some serious soul-searching. You know, Nathaniel said as they exchanged vows, I used to think my accident was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And now I think it might have been the best, because it brought me to you. The kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of the promise of a future they'd build together. As they pulled apart, Tanisha saw tears in his eyes. No regrets? She asked. Only one, he said, smiling. That it took me so long to realize that the greatest strength isn't in never falling down. It's in letting someone help you back up. Every love story is really a story about courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to fight for what matters most. What's the bravest thing you've ever done for love? Have you ever had to choose between fear and faith? Share your own story of courage in the comments below, and let's celebrate the power of love to transform our lives. As they rolled down the aisle together, Tanisha walking beside Nathaniel's wheelchair, their fingers intertwined, she thought about how far they'd both come. From two broken people afraid to trust, to a couple ready to face whatever came next. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Tanisha would finish her degree, maybe start her own business. Nathaniel would continue running his empire, but now with someone by his side who saw him as a man, not a balance sheet. And together, they would prove that love doesn't recognize boundaries. Not physical ones, not social ones, not the ones we build in our own hearts to protect ourselves from pain. Because sometimes, the greatest disability isn't physical. It's the inability to let someone love you exactly as you are. And sometimes, the greatest healing comes not from fixing what's broken, but from learning to see the beauty in the brokenness itself.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.